Hello and welcome to the Kentucky Today podcast. I am Lawrence Smith, the editor of Kentucky Today, alongside our Kentucky Today crew. Life Issues reporter Tessa Redmond. Hi, Tessa.
Hi.
And managing editor Mark Maynard. Hello, Mark.
Hello.
Chip is off this week, so we'll continue trudge along without him this week. But let's begin with the war in Iran. And things are fast moving. And by the time this posts, things could be different than they are right now. But it appears we have stepped back from the brink just hours after President Trump threatened to bomb Iran back to the Stone Age. And he threatened that the whole civilization, as he said, will die. The president announced a 2-week ceasefire. Iran apparently blinked and agreed to open the Strait of Hormuz, though the terms of that are still unclear. And Iran offered a peace plan, which the president has said is a good basis to begin the conversation. The agreement has been characterized as fragile. Iran is still firing missiles at its neighbors. It's a fluid situation right now, but we are at the point now where there is apparently some progress, a 2-week ceasefire that we pray holds, and this ends in a way that is good for Iran, the people of Iran, and good for the United States and for Israel. But I'm curious, give me your thoughts on this whole turn of events, Mark, starting with you, from the brink of something catastrophic to now a 2-week pause in the firing.
Yeah, I think it's been very difficult to know what to believe, to know what's happening. Can we trust what Iran's saying? Can we trust that they, won't that they'll stop? I don't know that they're the most trustworthy group to deal with on even if they sign a sheet of paper, that doesn't really mean anything. I mean, as you said, they've continued bombing in Israel for one, and other neighbors as well, even through this, although, they say, well, the ceasefire was with the United States, so, but I don't know. I don't trust Iran that much. And we hear a lot from Trump. I think President Trump, we all know he likes to get attention, and his quotes come with ready-made headlines for headline writers. I'm going to blow them to the Stone Age, and I'm going to this civilization is going to die. I mean, those are pretty strong statements when you think about it, and he's caught some flack over those, I think, and probably rightly so. For I'm not sure that's the language that we need to be using. I get that, we can't let them bully us for sure, but I don't know. There should be a better way of saying that. Maybe I think we speak loudly with our weapons, for one, and our power without those kind of statements.
Well, as you mentioned, Mark, the president used some very interesting language. Tessa, I think we all agree that we would rightly condemn that kind of language.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just concerning to see that kind of inflammatory language from the president of the United States. I expect more, especially in a situation that is just so tense and fragile as this, as we've already talked about. What's really struck me is just the lack of clarity on both sides. And Lawrence, you kind of mentioned this, but what does it mean for this, the terms that they're talking about? There's just a lot of information that we don't have, and even there are reports that the information that Iran passed on to journalists in English in relation to their uranium enrichment process and what that would mean in the context of a ceasefire, it's different than what was in their native tongue and was being circulated. So it's hard to know what to trust and where we're going to go from here. But in the meantime, it's good that the countries are at least moving forward.
Well, you both make a good point that, for one thing, we don't know who we're talking to, at least publicly, who we're talking to in Iran, negotiating with. But Iran's government, the Ayatollah and this Islamic Republic, they have an apocalyptic vision. So they don't mind being martyred for their cause. And so you can't trust anything really they say. Um, and as far as President Trump's comments, I think as Christians, we rightly condemn those as at least unpresidential, inappropriate, profane. But those who are defending him are saying that he's playing kind of the madman theory game. And if you've ever heard of that, President Nixon years ago tried that, where you make the enemy think you're crazy enough to do anything. And there's something tactical behind this. But I think as Christians, we would agree that the profane language and the threatening to the kinds of threats he made, they may have worked, but they certainly were not appropriate. There are those who say we should take him seriously, but not literally. I've heard that a lot from pundits. But as
Yeah.
Christians, we have to look at this a different way. Mark, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say that, you talked about it being, so fluid and that's so true. I mean, I will, wake up at 6:30 and check the AP and wow, something big has happened. Of course, I know the time difference is, makes a lot of difference too. And President Trump, know when he's going to fire off an email. It might be 3 in the morning. It might be, 8 at night. It could be almost any time. And that usually has a lot of colorful language as well, with whatever he's dealing with, and especially it's been that way with Iran. So I don't know that we're going to see the end of this anytime soon. I hope we do, and I hope the ceasefire holds. But they're going to be watching each other so closely that I don't see any way this ceasefire is going to hold. They're going to be coming at each other one more time, and I just hope and pray we don't lose more. More of our military men and women that are over there.
Let's go there next. Let's go there next. In fact, Mark and Tessa, I want you to weigh in on this as well. We have to acknowledge the heroism and tactical brilliance of our military and the CIA for rescuing the pilot and the weapons officer whose plane was shot down in Iraqi, or rather Iranian territory.
Yeah, I thought it was unbelievable when you read all that happened there. And you know what struck me was that there were actually Iranian civilians who helped the pilot, who helped hide him and move him. As of course, he had a bounty on his head, and I don't know if if they'd have captured him, they'd just shot him there or what they'd have done, but it wouldn't have been good. And actually, they were sympathizers with the U.S. They don't like what's going on in Iran, and I think that's probably the case more than Iran would want to say for sure. That even some of their own citizens don't agree with the things that they've done. So it was a miraculous rescue, though, and he stood like between two rocks for a long time. I mean, it was wow. They say those guys are prepared for that, though, that they actually train for that. If you go down, here's where you go, here's what you do. And that's great. I'm glad they did, because it's great that he was rescued, and the other one as well.
Tessa, your thoughts on that?
I'm just so grateful. We've already lost several American lives in the course of this conflict. So the fact that they spared no expense to bring these soldiers home, I'm just so grateful. I'm grateful they're okay. And it's just fascinating to read about the strategy, even in the communication sphere, and how they use that to their advantage to be able to shield all those who were involved in bringing the soldier home. So I'm just thankful things turned out the way that they did.
They said this was the first plane in 20 years that was shot down, which is just kind of interesting, although we really haven't had, a lot of conflicts that we've had to deal with in the last 20 years. So I don't know, maybe that's not such an alarming
the Gulf War was the last major, of course, Afghanistan, but.
Right. But anyway, that's what I read. It was the first one in 20 years that had been, shot down. So interesting.
Well, we'll certainly keep an eye on this fast unfolding situation, and we'll have the latest, of course, on Kentucky today. But we just certainly prayed that, as you said, that this ceasefire does hold, and there's an end to this conflict in a way that benefits both the Iranian people. And the question is, you mentioned, Mark, that this pilot may have been helped or weapons officer may have been helped by Iranians. We hope that their sentiment is widespread, that most of the Iranian people want to see this government go. We hope that's the case, but we do pray that this ends well for the United States, for the Iranian people, and for Israel and Iran's neighbors as well. All right, there's some other things besides the war that you guys wanted to talk about. Mark, let's start with you. What were your top stories this week you wanted to talk about?
Well, I got a couple, and both of them are through KBC programs, actually. And one is about weight loss for pastors and just healthy habits for pastors. Harold
A
Best,
subject close to our hearts, by the way.
yes, absolutely. Harold Best, has done a great job in getting all that organized. He's our financial consultant and our health fitness kind of consultant.
Yeah,
And
wellness.
wellness, right. And he's worked with several pastors who have formed a cohort group who are encouraging each other. And there's been a lot of weight loss from these guys. I know my pastor, Josh Schmidt, has lost, in fact, the day I called him to talk about this story, to ask him about it, he had lost 100 pounds at that point. And, you think about 100 pounds, that's like a person you've dropped. And I had a couple of pictures that actually from his Facebook page, that he had one with his one of his oldest son, Benjamin, who was standing with him at Great American Ballpark. And that was last October. And then another picture of him cutting his belt loop, and for about the sixth or seventh time at the church. And you can see it's striking. That picture tells a lot right there, I think. And he said Benjamin was so excited to make the cover of Kentucky Today. He was really happy about that. So I said, well, anybody should be happy about that. But anyway,
that's a good story, because these pastors, of course, primarily interested in the spiritual health of themselves and their congregations, and sometimes don't pay attention to their physical health.
yeah, and I think Josh made a good point in the story, in that, how can he talk to somebody about sin if, this is him quoting, he's saying, I have a sin of gluttony. How can I tell them that they're wrong, and look at me? So he's taking care of that. He's trying to make himself a better example. And I think this cohort group there, there's another pastor, Mark Webb from Union, who I think he's lost 74 pounds, which it's a lot of weight too. But these guys, and I think there's 6 others that are on this Zoom call every month. They encourage each other from what's going on. They give each other tips. They have a speaker every month, and it's something that also gives them some accountability. And I think that's real important in any kind of weight loss journey, is to have some accountability to somebody or some group or that kind of thing. But it's a great program, and I'm so thankful for that. Harold Best has really taken charge of that. Pastoral wellness. Pastors are under a lot of stress, and they don't need any self-stress that's going to come with weight, extra weight, or just poor fitness habits.
Yeah.
Kyle Knopfsinger, another pastor, is kind of been part of it too, and he has talked about weight training, the importance of all that, and in overall fitness. And Nathan Wisnat, who's the AMS in Davis-McLean County, has written a book about weight loss. He lost a lot of weight, and he wrote a book about it, and they are using that book as kind of a guide. So, it was a really good story, and I think I would recommend people look at it if they're interested in losing weight. Maybe you get a copy of Nathan's book. There's a link in there for that. But I think it's good to see Kentucky Baptist pastors not only taking care of their flocks, but taking care of themselves.
Absolutely. Tessa, we'll move to you. You did a story on health related as well. This was specifically referring to missions opportunities related to women's health.
Yes, yeah, the IMB had a wonderful story that I was able to put up on Kentucky Today last week. And it follows a missionary who works with local believers to go into the Himalayan mountains and find remote villages and minister to women there by doing women's health trainings. So things like teaching them how to do a self-examination to check for breast cancer, and doing menstrual health trainings, things like that. And it's just awesome because they've been able to bring women into a space where they can fellowship together. They can learn important things where they don't often have access to tools or information about how to take care of themselves and the bodies that the Lord has blessed them with. But then they can also share the gospel. And it was just such an encouraging read to see what these missionaries are doing and how they are serving these women by meeting physical needs, but also meeting spiritual needs. And I just loved one of the things that the writer put at the bottom of the story was when they go in and they provide reusable feminine hygiene products to these women and they do menstrual cycle trainings with them. They tell them about the story of the woman who had the bleeding problem, who was healed by Jesus. And even though the culture looked at her and said she was dirty and belonged on the outskirts of society, Jesus offered her healing and belonging. And ultimately, he offers that to all of us, but that they have to make the decision to follow him. And so at the bottom of that story, they just included here's some ways that you can pray for this missionary, for the local believers who are there, who are doing this work, that are having to hike days into the mountains to find these women and share the gospel with them. And it was just a very encouraging read.
Yeah, very cool story. My wife did that years ago on a mission trip to Myanmar, Burma.
Mm.
They took in feminine hygiene products and taught the women about health and used that as an opportunity to share the gospel. So it's a really, really neat way to build a connection with the women so you can tell them about the saving power of Jesus. Um,
Absolutely.
for me, I had a couple of stories that I'm a space freak, okay? I enjoy space flight, have since I was a little kid. And this Artemis 2 thing's just been fascinating to me. Um, Setting the distance record for being the furthest away from Earth, and then circling the moon, taking those just wonderful, amazing pictures of the Earth. And the crew, I should name the crew, the commander is Reed Weissman, the pilot Victor Glover, and mission specialist Christina Cook, and Canadian Jeremy Hansen. And Glover in particular is apparently a Christian because he's been very vocal about his faith along the way. But I just find that whole thing interesting, and we certainly pray that it all goes well for them when they splash down safely in back on Earth. This on Friday, I believe, is when that's supposed to happen. But I've been fascinated by that. In fact, one of the places I worked in television was in Houston, so I was very close to the space program. And in fact, I was there when the Challenger exploded, and saw how that affected that entire community. And now the churches held prayer services, including the church I belonged to at the time, First Baptist Houston, held prayer services after that. So I was just fascinated by that whole thing. And your thoughts? What were you thinking as you were watching some of the space stuff? You probably weren't as fascinated as I am, but what are your thoughts, Tessa?
Of course, I grew up like you, Lawrence, in the space age, really, when everything was just getting big and things were happening. They're going to the moon, and and all that. And it's kind of funny. My wife always told her students, she said, "Yeah, I watched the moon walk," and they're like, "What? How old are you?" It's like, yeah, we get that. But it's it is fascinating to see that, and it's kind of interesting that we've walked on the moon, we've been on the moon, but we kind of stopped, and that was it. And now we're going back and kind of checking things out, I guess, and
Preparing to set up a moon base, a permanent base.
yeah, eventually set up the moon base, and I guess that's the start of this. I mean, trillions of dollars spent, on these rockets, and all that they've done with them is it's really incredible to think, of going into space. I mean, would you do that? Would you get in one of those rockets? Yeah, I don't know.
I'd be tempted, especially when I was
Yeah.
younger. And
Well,
in fact,
I'll
when
tell
I,
you
when
one
I
thing,
worked in Houston, NASA had begun a program to take a journalist into space. And one of
Yeah,
the
wow.
folks
Oh, wow.
that I was working with was kind of on that short list. But after Challenger, of course, that all changed.
Yeah.
Tessa, you of course were not around when the Apollo program was going on. So give me your thoughts on what you're
No.
watching.
Well, My mom is from Houston, and so I grew up in that area. I've been to the Space Museum down there. I was actually telling my husband Michael last night, just reminiscing on what it was like to be there and realize that we have more technology in our pocket now than what they had when they sent men to the moon. And I've just been reflecting on, back, I believe it was in 1968 when they were orbiting the moon, reading from Genesis 1. And I was just thinking how much times have changed. So often we live in a culture that for some reason has this narrative that science is incompatible with the Bible. And we've come a long way, I think, from reading scripture right on a live broadcast, sending scientists to the moon to now. And of course, like you were saying, we've seen at least one of the astronauts on this mission be pretty outspoken about faith. But I just think it's interesting, just how far we've come, not just with technology, but also just the Bible's place in society at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah, Lawrence, last year and last summer, we were in Melbourne Beach where my son lives, and we actually saw a rocket launch at 4 a.m. from the beach, and we were the only ones watching at that time, or at least in that spot. And also during that time, a great nature thing happens. One of those giant turtles comes out of the ocean and to lay her eggs at the time that rocket was going up. So that's two pretty cool things. It was worth getting up at 4 a.m. for that.
That's on my bucket list to see an actual space launch. I've not seen one go up. So I'd love to see and experience that sometime. But as we watched all this, what came to mind was Psalm 19:1. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the heavens above proclaim his handiwork. So we saw that. And how can you look at that and say, this is all an accident? This is all God's creation. And it's just amazing to watch that exploration happen. I have one more, but Mark, I think we skipped over one of yours you wanted to talk about. We talked about physical wellness, pastor wellness. We didn't talk about your story about, kind of church wellness.
That's exactly what it was, and it's a program from our CCR team, which is Church Consulting Revitalization, not the Cleveland Clearwater Revival, and as a lot of us know CCR, but this is an interesting program. It's called REMAP, and it stands for Revitalization Ministry Assessment Profile, and basically it's a church self profile, and it's looking at not only what you do well, but what you don't do so well. And they give you a chart to go through and a whole program to go through to determine what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are, what you need to work on to become a healthier church. And several churches have been through it, and our regional consultants go and we'll walk them through the whole program. And it's a robust program. It's not just a sheet of paper. I mean, there's a lot of things you have to go through to determine, okay, yeah, we're really good at worship, or you know what, wow, we're really bad at worship. We need to change some things. And worship is one of the things that people changed a lot, in that they brought new instruments in, they brought drums in, the church had never had drums before, and they brought guitars, and they changed their whole worship setup. But it's not just that. It's, how you're on missions, how are you on, there's 15 different categories that you're self-assessing. Nobody's telling you, you do that bad, you do this good, you do that bad. You're doing that yourself. The pastor and most of them have put a team of people together to put this program together and say, okay, we do these 3 things real well. Let's keep working on those. But we do these 2 or 3 things really bad, and we need to improve that. And their church is getting healthier because of that. And this program costs nothing for them. They just need to call their regional consultant, and they can get them the information. And, and it doesn't matter if you're big, small, if you're about to collapse, if you're not about to collapse, whatever, any situation, you can make things better, no matter who you are or what church you are, you can make things better. And I think, self-assessment is something we all ought to do anyway as the individual. So why not the church, right? And churches need to, they need to up their game. They need to keep up in their game and get, let's get as many people in there as we can to hear the gospel.
Our regional consultants really do a great job in so many different areas. So that's something that our Kentucky Baptist churches should really take advantage of, is the consultation services that these regional consultants provide. I'm glad you did that story. The KBC and others have been fighting switching topics for a long time to get churches excluded from having to collect the sales tax on some transactions. Bills to accomplish that have failed, uh, in part because of opposition from leadership in the state House. But thanks to leadership in the state Senate, particularly Budget Chairman Chris McDaniel, the sales tax exemption was included in this year's budget bill. So I talked to Senator McDaniel about why he was among those who fought so hard to get churches excluded from having to pay the sales tax.
When we began doing tax reform, we really didn't intend to catch up religious institutions in the way that they were caught up in the expansion of the sales tax base. For a variety of reasons, it happened mainly due to IRS tax structure reasons, and the work to find a good carve out has been ongoing. And we have to balance where there are, making sure we don't create a disadvantage with a private organization that has to pay tax that could be competing against a religious or nonprofit organization that does not have to pay tax. And so we tried for a while to find that appropriate balance, but it was something that we definitely wanted to do.
You, I understand, a personal experience with this, your involvement in upward basketball. Talk about how you were involved in that and how it shaped how you viewed this issue.
Right. So I was actually involved in Upward before this became an issue when my children were younger. So I coached for several years and I refereed for several years, and I just loved the program. But when we come into the General Assembly, we all have human experiences that really influence how we view the issue. And so for me, the issue of religious institutions and sales tax always revolved around the entrance fee to Upward basketball. And so you might as well have just said, why don't you think you should pay tax on the entry fee to Upward basketball? And so that kind of informed my take on the situation, right? In my case, it's done at a small local church as part of the overall church mission to have a basketball league that, kids from the community can play in, and the church sponsors, and it's part of the overall mission of the organization. And so it really informed my take on the subject.
You mentioned efforts to do this in the past. A bill a couple of years ago included all nonprofits. This exemption is for religious institutions specifically. Talk about that narrow focus and why that's important.
Well, we really, religious institutions have a very unique role in our society, and a very important role in our society. And the attempt to allow them to hold on to the maximum amount of their resources to reinvest in that mission is very, very, very important. And it's also important to note that just because an organization enjoys a nonprofit status doesn't mean that they necessarily don't make money. And in a lot of their cases, do compete directly with private enterprises. And so we just felt like the religious exemption was the right path to pursue. And that's why you found us here on this one.
Now, in the past, some opponents have said they were concerned that exempting religious institutions might open the floodgates for others to say, hey, me too. What's your take on that?
Well, that's certainly a potential. And there will be organizations, I have no doubt, that will say, well, if you did it for churches, why shouldn't you do it for insert other good societal cause here, right? And so that will be a debate that this certainly creates. But we felt like for sure the right policy was churches and religious institutions in the current time.
Does this being included in the budget bill mean that it has to be approved again in 2 years in the new budget bill when it's written? Is this going to come up again?
Well, it actually occurred in the revenue bill. And so it's slightly different because a revenue bill actually has some sections that have to come up in 2 years and some sections that are permanent. I believe that this fell into the section where we will revisit it in 2 years. And if we have to, then we'll take a look at that time. But it is an issue that enjoys broad support throughout the General Assembly.
That's Senator Chris McDaniel, among those who championed the sales tax exclusion for churches in the budget bill. And as we talked about, it's unclear as to whether we'll have this fight again in 2 years. We'll be keeping our eye on that. I'm going to close with this, though. NCAA basketball. Michigan
Listen,
ended up winning the championship. And I have to say this, we had a little competition, a bracket competition here at the KBC. No betting, of course, but we did have a competition to see who would win, who would have the best predictions for the basketball championship. And the winner was Tessa. Tessa,
Yes.
who admits she knows nothing about college basketball, actually did the best in the bracket competition. So, Tessa, what's your secret?
There is no secret. I guess I just didn't care. And so I don't know if that contributed. But I'm so glad you brought that up. Yes, I have not yet been presented a prize, but I'm very honored to have taken first place, and go Michigan.
Congratulations for outflanking all of us who pretend to be experts in college basketball. But of course, Mark, now all eyes are on the transfer portal to see what kind of team both UK and U of L and others can assemble.
Yeah, Michigan had the first all transfer team, where the first one to win the title with all transfers. I mean, I think we're going to see that equaled throughout the years ahead. And, I found a stat today that said there are 5,657 Division I basketball players. 2,700 of them are in the transfer portal. So, nearly half of the players are looking for, let's say, greener pastures. Green
emphasis on green, yes.
Yeah, very green pastures with the money that's available out there. I don't know that there's a fix to this at all. I know they're looking at things. The NCAA is having a meeting today about some things and about eligibility. They're talking about, like, you get 5 years regardless. And no more of this. There's a player that played for Kentucky that originally, Cameron Fletcher, he's at High Point. This is his 7th season in college basketball. Now, I know you get hurt and things happen, but wow, is that just crazy? 7 seasons.
Well,
anyway,
that's crazy. I mean, I don't mind players receiving fair compensation, but there's got to be some guardrails around this, some regulations and rules, some caps on salaries maybe. They can pursue NIL deals all they want, but as far as, pay for play, there's got to be some guardrails around that and about transferring. And, you got to keep in mind what universities are supposed to be all about, which is not sports, but education. So.
Yeah. And I mean, are these guys even going to class? Really?
Well, they have to. Interestingly, this came up the other day in a discussion that I was part of. They do have to still qualify academically, so they can't skip class.
Yeah.
But I'm sure, learning about, history or geometry or whatever, anthropology, is last on their list of things they want to do when they're being paid enormous amounts to play basketball or football.
Yeah. The Miami quarterback said, of course, he was a graduate transfer. He wasn't just, he'd already graduated at Georgia, and he put his name in the transfer portal and went to Miami. And he had never been in a class at Miami because he was taking one online class, because he was a grad student. So he was taking one class only and was playing football, and he said, I've never been to a class. I mean, did he even check in online? Probably not, because he was talking about how he spends every hour of every day at the facility there, watching film and whatnot. I don't know where it ends. It's but it's, as long as the fans come and the donors come and fill the coffers, then, who knows if it'll ever end. It just
Well,
seems to be
it's
unsustainable.
it's
Yeah.
a big fix, and if we could fix it, we wouldn't be sitting here. So,
You're right.
but we'll end with congratulations again to Tessa for outsmarting all of
Yes.
us in our brackets.
Congratulations, Tessa.
Thank
Your
you.
strategy was great.
There
Well,
was
thanks for
none.
watching and for listening to the Kentucky Today podcast. Please tell others about KentuckyToday.com and about this podcast. And for more on the Kentucky Baptist Convention and the cooperative program that makes this and so many other programs possible, go to kybaptist.org. Lord willing, we'll see you next time on the Kentucky Today podcast.